Raising Unicorns.
Harmon Brothers.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Raising Unicorns. On the podcast today, I have the one and only, the amazing, incredibly talented,
oh boy,
Natalie Madsen.
that's me.
It's
Hello.
time to chat with a legend.
That's legendary.
So Natalie has worked on some of our biggest campaigns. Like we worked together on Kodiak Cakes, and we worked together on Next Vacay. I'm trying to remember. We worked on a lot of stuff. We worked on Chatbook.
Anytime we're at a writer treat and everyone's like listing the ones they've worked on, I'm like, I'm forgetting so many. I just feel like it's been a lot.
It's been a lot over the years for sure.
It's been
You've been
so
a go-to. Everyone that we brought on from Studio C and try to collaborate with, you guys seem to have like a really unbelievably quick learning curve on this stuff. Like you just, it felt very natural for you guys. So maybe I want you to talk a little bit about like sketch comedy and even the improv elements of sketch that you guys like had, and how that like I think it probably gave you a head start and kind of a leg up on, say, some other type of writer.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I don't really know what it would be like to learn writing in any other way, but like our years of writing together and being so adaptive, I think and the more I've written with other people outside of our like creative group, the more I've realized like, oh, we're super quick to just be like, okay, cut that joke, come up with a better one. Like it's not a big deal to us.
Yes.
And there's just other writers, and not that they're worse or better or anything, but there's other writers that I'll notice will kind of like fight for a joke a little longer than maybe I would. I'm just like, I'm just so used to like killing your darlings. It's just like, it's such a part of the process that it's like, sure. And I think being so adaptive and collaborative, I think is actually pretty rare for writers. But I do remember when I first came on with Harmon Brothers and somebody's telling me from the Harmon Brothers team, we've learned that it's easier to like make comedians advertisers and advertisers comedians. And I always thought that was so interesting. But my guess is that a lot of it did feel really instinctual. Like, a hook, of course. Like you have to have your first joke in the first 3 seconds. Otherwise people aren't going to watch the sketch anymore. Yeah. You have to have, right? Like every few lines should be a punchline. There's a certain cadence. There's a certain like, and you try
rhythm to it.
There's a rhythm, and there's like your sentences should be as little words as possible. There's like messaging should be very quick. And even in sketch comedy in particular, something you learn, like there can't be competing funnies. There needs to be like one simple joke and one game. And then you just push it as far as that can go. Yeah. And you learn where your boundaries are in that game instead of like, oh, now we've muddied it and there's like 5 different funnies. This isn't working. Yeah. Like that's what sketch comedy is all the time. And so I think when I moved into like an advertising space of being in like an advertising writer's room, I guess I never really consciously thought of this, but that probably was subconsciously why it kind of worked so well. Yeah. Because we were just really used to that. We just kind of know what the flow should be. And then it was almost like the game of the ads were like selling the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was part of the game. It was it was
the
like sandbox.
The whole point is we're trying to sell an item. And so how can you come up with like a comedy game that's the goal and that's the end result? Yeah. And then you just push it as far as you can go. You make it as silly as possible.
Yeah. And I think that's like an interesting way to put it, of like, this is like kind of the constraints that you have, and you have to deal with it. And it's interesting too, because like I would say like the average length of one of our ads is about 2 to 5 minutes, which is very close, honestly, as far as the time frame. And also like it's like you have a sense, like I think all you writers from Studio C and JK, I think all of you guys have a natural intuition of like how long, like if we outstayed our welcome, like, you know what I mean? And like knowing where that is.
We need a joke here. We need to move location. We need a new point. We need a new something.
And you've always done an amazing job of taking the chaos, because it can feel overwhelming. Sometimes we're upwards of like 20 pages of
it
content.
Can be a lot. Yeah.
And kind of distilling that down and taking pieces and maybe modifying them or changing them or tweaking them or being like, and I think like you said, you're really good at just like tossing it. Like if this doesn't work, we're not going to break our back. We're just going to write something that's more suited better. Yeah. And like, so what was that something that you developed at Studio C and JK, where like there was so many ideas in like the writer's room when you guys are pitching and you like would hone in on that? Because I think even above like, this is not a knock to Wit or Mal, they have their own superpowers. Yeah, for sure. I think like that's one thing. And every CD I've worked with here has said that about you. I don't know if they've ever told that about you.
No one's ever said that.
Like Ryan was like, after, I can't remember what project it was on. I think it was Sashbag.
Oh yeah.
Just a couple months ago. Yeah. He was like, I want Natalie on like every one of my projects when it's a hero. Because like she's so good at like focusing like what needs to be.
It down.
Yeah. And I think also it helps with like energy conservation, because when you're at a writing retreat for 2 days, you only
Yeah.
have so much energy to give.
It's true.
And so I think you've been able to focus and cut out all the crap that doesn't need to be focused on and really
Yeah.
focus on what matters.
Yeah.
And then it allows that additional energy to be expended on punching up the script or having fun and messing around with it and not worrying about all the structure stuff as much,
Yeah, totally.
Is that something you had to do at Studio C and JK?
I think so. I think that's probably a skill I've definitely honed more on an ad retreat than like in the writer's room. Part of the Studio C process, it's actually, and maybe this is also why it was so instinctive for us. In the Studio C process, we would bring a script or an idea about 80% done. And we bring it to the room and say, okay, help us get to the next 20%. And sometimes it was a quick 20%. And sometimes it was a never mind. It's got to be broken down to, 40% done and rewrite it. But I do think that came with years and years and years of writing, short, 2 to 5 minute sketches, putting it in front of an audience. They either laugh or they don't. It's awesome feedback.
Yeah, instant.
It either works or it really doesn't. And did you just learn to say, okay, that really didn't work, moving on to the next thing, right? And so I think kind of learning and thinking from an audience perspective at all times, that was such a big part of our writing experience. Like those 4 years of Divine Comedy, we would write it. A few days later, it'd be in front of an audience. A few days later, it was our show. And so between the, tech run of like our test audience and the show, we had to fix it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think just learning that skill of like, will the audience laugh here? And it's always a guess. You never really know. But the more the more you work like that, the better you get at guessing what's going to land and what's not.
Yeah.
And so for me, it helps me just be like, okay, easy, cut. This works, this doesn't, right? Because you just think from an audience perspective, is this going to be sticky? Is this going to land? Are they going to resonate with this? If it doesn't serve the audience, it's out of the script.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
It's fluff at that point, or it's even detracting.
Or even if it takes too long to get to a punchline, it's like we're going to lose the audience, even though it's a great punchline. They're never going to hear it. It's things like that. So I don't know. I think it's probably a skill I probably equally learned from just Harmon Brother ad writing and just how comedy works. Like it's either, like I said, it either works or it doesn't.
And I think that's such a, for me, that was such a interesting thing to learn because I had worked in advertising previously, but I think that that so often it didn't get to that kind of audience testing before it ever got to production and got made. And sometimes you had a really good writer who just had really good instincts and could nail it.
Yeah.
More often than not, I would say they'd write something that worked well with that writer or worked well with the client that was like, I love that. I think it's funny. Yeah. And I think that that's something that we don't ever take for granted, at Harmon Brothers. It sounds like obviously with JK too, where you guys were testing these things and Studio C, you guys doing all the tech rehearsal stuff where you're getting that instant feedback. Well, putting it through some water through the pipes and doing audience testing and laugh graph testing. Is this hitting outside of our small group of writers and creative directors who are on the project? And I think too, I think it's a really good lesson for because our audience is mostly entrepreneurs or small business owners who or even marketers, but they might not be in the business of writing comedy or writing ads that are specifically comedic centered ads.
Yeah.
And I think it's a skill set that it's really important to learn if you have the time and availability to test out your assumptions and test out your material.
Absolutely.
Because so often you're it's not working. You know what I mean? And then like you said, you learn over time what works and you get better at it and you get a higher hit rate. You
kind of develop that Spidey sense a little bit. Yeah. But then still there's this great quote from Conan O'Brien, who's I don't know how many monologues he did in his career on his show, but he was I just know every time it's always a guess. You're always guessing until there's an audience and if they laugh or they don't laugh.
Yeah.
And we can make an educated guess, but it's always a guess.
Always. Yeah.
And the only person that can tell you yes or no is that audience. And so that feedback has always been a huge part of our process.
And I think that's too, I think you spoke to it earlier, but you lose your ego very quickly when you when you go out and you're that tanked. That was not funny.
So bad. Well, and then another part of this learning too, I can't tell you how many times back in the day I would put so many hours into a sketch. I'd be this is going to kill. This is going to be my new character. This is my ticket to SNL.
And
it would
just
be and then some other one that I'm just we should probably have a sketch about April Fool's Day. And so I guess I'll write an April Fool's Day sketch for my sketch this week. And then it does 10 million online. And I'm come on. It's you kind of don't know all the time.
Oh yeah.
It's always a good reminder of if of course get to know your audience, try to make the best educated guess. But testing is really important.
I think the principle is you bring people in that have the focus and have the like skill set to
Yeah.
bring the element you need into your advertising. Like you
Right,
bring the
right.
marketer side in to like really understand, differentiate, and clearly define the attributes and values of the product that make people tick and make
Yeah.
people want to purchase it. And then you give that to the writers, and the writing team and the comedians can actually come in and take those elements and get them and present them in a way that are memorable and sticky
Totally.
and engaging and funny.
And I do feel like one of the most important steps of the process for Harmon Brothers writing is that client phone call, where at some point somebody says, what's the one thing you want people to walk away knowing? Or
Yeah.
like, what's the one message? And that's where, from the small business side, it's so important to know your audience and your messaging and what's most effective, right? So when you come to an advertising agency, you can know what that focus should be.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yep.
the
Yep.
thing
Yep.
that
Yep.
really gets people is this, part of our product.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good to know. Let's just make a whole ad focusing on that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why it's good to learn that about the product itself. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's just me using it and saying, oh, I know why I'd buy this.
Yeah.
I get it. And sometimes it's more from a client perspective too.
Yeah. And I think because we always try to employ the user method where we go and actually use it ourselves,
totally.
experience it from a customer side, not only from a marketer side. Because oftentimes the marketers are so steeped in the product and so deep in it, it's hard for them to pull out if they haven't done a lot of really good customer research. So that's why I feel like
before, for sure.
Our writing process is really helpful because we try and get the product in their hands as early as possible, give it to lots of people who are in the target audience, get feedback, and distill it down into a brief.
And again, it's always like simpler than you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should be like instinctual. It should be quick to explain, right?
People should be like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even on complicated products, like if you distill it down simple enough and like instinctual enough, they should be like, oh yeah, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Anyway.
I think you're right. And I think the way that you just said that made me think, I wonder if some of that comes from, I do have a degree in theater ed. And so part of it is like, I also have part of my brain as a teacher. I love teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when I feel like I can, and in comedy, you have to do this all the time. You take all the information and then you just put it out very simply. And improv, that's basically all it is, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's too much going on. Let's simplify.
Yeah, let's focus in on the one funny thing, right?
Yeah.
We always say the confused customer never buys. And I think like the same thing, it's like a confused viewer never laughs. Like if the joke is too convoluted.
They'll just scroll.
Or they'll just, especially now where it's selective viewing where they can just like kind of opt out.
Yeah.
Like if you're not engaging them and if it's not immediately funny and understandable, they're gone, know? So I think that's like all those disciplines and like focusing, I think is like why that's kind of come together in like the writing style we do here, why it's been successful is like that focus. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Anyway.
Totally agree.
Well, Natalie, this has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, Shane.
I really appreciate you coming in.
Hey, anytime.
And I was hoping we could cross this over with a recording session for Tuttle Twins, but you just came in anyway.
Oh, you know what? I'm around.
I'm close by.
I'm always just like hanging out in the break room, stealing your snack.
Yeah, is that why?
Could never get rid of me.
Some of the M&Ms or peanut M&Ms are always gone.
Maybe.
Anyway, well, thanks so much for coming on. This has been super, super helpful, very insightful. It's interesting to hear like all the different writers and their like kind of process and their background and kind of like the special like spice and flavor you brought value to all of our clients and to Harmon Brothers and the culture that we've developed here over the years. Because I definitely feel like you're a big part of like what's made us special and what's made us awesome is kind of like the talent you have.
It's a great place to be.
Well, don't stop it.
Well,
all right. Until next time.
Thank you,
Natalie.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you for watching Raising Unicorns!
Subscribe now.